Hey, I'm Taylor Sinople, frequent moviegoer and very occasional film critic, and today I have for you my picks for the 18 best films of 2018. And I was thinking, if I stick to this structure of doing one extra review every year, pretty soon these things are going to be hours long. So what I'm going to do this time is sprint through the upper picks and then spend a bit more time on my top 10, since those are really the best of the best. So let's jump in at 18, and in just a couple minutes, I will see you again at number 10.
Lazzaro!
Lazzaro!
Oh, Lazzaro!
Lazzaro!
The pastoral meets the magical in this distinctly two-halved Italian oddity. Super 16mm film transports us into the past, and the way the story begins so grounded in the daily life of these peasant workers and then starts to drift into the mist at some point in the second act makes for an evocative, if not muted, effect. In this Japan-set adventure from Wes Anderson, a ragtag group of dogs, recently declared illegal and abandoned on an island of trash, help a boy search for his lost pet. The dialogue is as crisp and quirky as you'd demand from Anderson, but the real star is the impossibly detailed sets that highlight and celebrate the meticulous work of the crafters and animators. In Private Life, you'll find Paul Giamatti in his first completely realized dramatic lead role in years and years. Giamatti is, of course, the king of bittersweet, and here he brings his ability to throw out both frenetic agitation and unexpected warmth in turn like no one else. Playing against him is Kathryn Hahn in a career-affirming performance as a woman committed and perhaps obsessed with becoming a mother despite her family's struggles with fertility. It's a difficult subject matter to broach, and Private Life does it with an open heart, leaning hard into the emotional sparring that makes us human. If we have any hope of reigniting the value of kindness in 2018, it's with Paddington 2. This damn bear is so genuinely charming, I wouldn't have believed it myself. Suffice it to say, there is a good reason the cast boasts the likes of Sally Hawkins and Michael Gambon and Julie Walters and Jim Broadbent and Brendan Gleeson and Peter Capaldi and Hugh Grant. It goes on and on and on. What an unexpectedly well-made, tightly plotted adventure, and in a genre crowded with films competing to manufacture feel-good moments, Paddington 2 sits at the top with its authentic defense of compassion. How's that for genre whiplash? For me, Hereditary fills the majority of my picks for the most horrifying scenes from the past decade. Director Ari Aster makes two perfect moves here. First, he starts his horror film with what is essentially an hour-long domestic drama, building a core of character investment that supercharges the stakes. Second, he stuffs the story with detail that, like The Witch before it, draws on a bedrock of existing lore that encourages you to research and rewatch, combing every moment for additional revelations, of which there are plenty to find. In Olivier Assayas's smart and funny nonfiction, authors, publishers, and actors muse ad nauseum on art consumption in the age of new media. The main pleasure here is in watching this collection of kind of irritating characters struggle to clarify and nail down their own shifting opinions in a way that is, I think, pretty relatable, and an approach to dialogue that I haven't seen very often before. The cyclical conversations can feel didactic at first, but with a bit of trust in Assayas's direction, I found him to have fewer firm opinions on the state of contemporary art than it first seemed.
Et toi, tu travailles sur quelque chose?
Bon, j'ai pas trop envie d'en parler.
Et ça avance?
Oh, oui, bien.
On n'en saura pas plus.
Non.
Non.
Border is like watching the birth of urban legend. Like hearing a horrifying folktale for the first time, its details shockingly fresh and yet rooted in myth. Best of all, this sense of unnerving discovery lasts throughout Border's 110 minutes, offering plot developments that only get stranger and scarier. The third act goes so far with the story, risking flat out losing you to repulsion, and I love that about it. Oh, and I almost forgot, it's one of the year's best romances. 3 vignettes into this 6-part Western anthology series from the Coen brothers, and I thought, that's it. That's the most depressing cinema moment of the year. I've found it. And then the film just kept going. Existentialism and cynicism run wild in these often funny and occasionally unsettling parables from the American frontier. The varying tones and themes keep you on your toes, while the pervasive threat of death ties all 6 parts into one cohesive, seriously rewatchable experience. Picking a favorite feels strangely personal, as each vignette kind of stands in for an entire worldview. It'll have cinephiles squaring off in the streets, dueling to the death over their rankings. 3, 4, 6, 5, 1, 2. Okay, we made it. Here we are, top 10. Let's slow things down and really soak in these moments from the most incredible films of the year. These are my very favorites. Let's jump in, starting with number 10. Birds of Passage is an engrossing crime story wrapped around an ethnographically inspired depiction of the Wayuu people, the largest indigenous ethnic group in Colombia. These are a people that live in relative isolation in villages on the outskirts of Colombian settlements, interacting with outsiders on the basis of necessity. In Birds of Passage, we see the impact that the Colombian drug trade has on the region in the 1970s when a Wayuu man and his best friend begin selling marijuana to American tourists, beginning a cycle of wealth, greed, and violence that threatens to destroy the Wayuu way of life. So the pleasures of this film are twofold. You're going to get the classic rise to power mafia story that seems to be endlessly entertaining, but you're also going to get this detailed and beautiful look at a little-known culture, their ceremonial traditions, their crafts, their spirituality. Together, switching hands back and forth between this kinetic crime saga and then this documentarian undertaking is genius. Each facet improves the other.
One, two, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Push that rock song. Strong feet out. I'll serve the right back side. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Rock, 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 rock. Rock it out. Rock, 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 around the clock tonight. Starts 2, 3, and 4.
In Cold War, 2 lovers meet in trying times and do everything they can to stay together throughout the years against a universe and perhaps an audience trying to push them apart. I've never seen a romance where you're so clearly trying to tell the characters, I'm not sure you guys should actually be together, to which they reply, maybe not, but we're doing it anyways. The relationship is defined by music, and for soundtracks, you won't find many more successfully integrated into the very fabric of the narrative than this. Rich black and white cinematography and careful blocking and composition makes this as sumptuous as Ida, director Paweł Pawlikowski's 2013 Oscar winner. Add in that it's only 89 minutes long and you've got one of the most intense, insular romances I've ever seen on screen, a claustrophobic on and off affair that burns in sharp focus, while history of seismic proportions foggily drifts by in the background.
이게 무슨 소리예요?
아, 이거 북한에서 대남 방송 쏘는 그 스피커 소리예요.
저기 저 너머가 북한이잖아.
아, 재밌네.
내가 살던 집이 없어져서 섭섭하네.
In Burning, two childhood friends reconnect as adults. She, living in a cramped apartment in Seoul, working as an advertising model. He, living on a farm and working as a delivery driver. They go to dinner, revisit old memories. A new connection starts to form. Then, a new man enters the mix. She meets him while traveling. A fabulously wealthy man from Seoul, a modern Gatsby. And they start to date. But something about him seems off, like he's holding on to a secret. Burning is the most heavyweight film on my list. It's designed to consume your thoughts, poking at you even months later about what you might have missed or just not been shown. There's at least a couple of fully realized stories running concurrently here to consider, and man does that narrative construction plug you right into the paranoia that sits at the core of the story. It feels like you're being tasked with studying the film like a detective, collecting evidence and drawing your own conclusions about what's happening. Director Lee Chang-dong takes full advantage of his ability to manipulate your point of view, showing only exactly what he wants you to see, adding only the audio he wants you to hear. To further complicate things, Chang-dong introduces layer upon layer of visual metaphor to parse. How do these characters stand in for the economic and social climate in Korea? And what is it about the Seoul Tower that's so alluring and erotic? With all this going on, Burning becomes an especially active movie-going challenge. It can feel laborious at times, but the experience in retrospect is unmatched.
Sorry for making you worry about me. If we had a phone, I could have called you.
Always been able to communicate without all that.
I think it might be easier on us if we try to adapt.
We're wearing their clothes, we're in their house, we're eating their food, we're doing their work. We have adapted. The only place we can't be seen is in this house.
We can still think our own thoughts. Like you said.
Okay, at number 7, Leave No Trace plots the experiences of a homeless father and daughter living in a national park in the Pacific Northwest when they're tracked down by government officials and forced to reintegrate into society. Deborah Granick directs. It's her first effort since Winter's Bone in 2010, and this one finds her in a more meditative state, pondering the lives of outsiders, of atypical ways of living. And while it can be a little bit infuriating to realize the full extent to which we've developed ourselves out of the ability to live freely in certain ways like the characters are trying to do, Leave No Trace isn't purely a repudiation of modern society. Instead, Granick is exploring the space between easy options. It's Hemingway's iceberg theory, saying a lot with a little, with a coming-of-age story snuck in. A story at the heart of which stands Thomasin McKenzie in a commanding lead performance opposite Ben Foster as the father. It's her quiet journey as a character that makes Leave No Trace such a gentle, simmering achievement.
We didn't need to be rescued.
Your dad needs to provide you shelter and a place to live.
He did.
From Gravity to Children of Men, Alfonso Cuarón is known for spectacle, and that alone made Roma, a drama in gorgeous black and white, an intriguing must-see for this year. And as it turns out, Roma is an evocative spectacle in its own way. It's set in a very tumultuous, specific time in Mexico's past, and told from the point of view of those privileged enough to be largely insulated from the turmoil. The story centers on a series of vignettes tracking the evolution of a relationship between a maid and her employer as the domestic and economic facets of their relationship blend and overlap. The vignettes are straightforward and presented at a measured pace, but grow increasingly emotionally complex. Part of that complexity comes from the distance at which Koran places the audience from the story, particularly during key moments that are rendered in long takes from wide compositions. During these moments, the onus is placed squarely on the audience to bring whatever judgment or conclusions they may. It ensures a compelling and slightly different connection is being made with each audience member. The cinematography just must be talked about. It's triumphantly expressive and was done by Koran himself, biting just the right amount from usual collaborator Emmanuel Lubezki, without setting out to match him. Instead of duplicating Lubezki's iconic fluidity, Koran takes a uniquely static approach in Roma, deployed most effectively, I think, in a series of long pans from left to right and then back again, the likes of which you don't often see anymore. The lasting impression is that of an auteur making his autobiographical passion project, his 400 Blows, his Lady Bird for a more recent example, later in his career. Not as soon as possible, not his first film, but later. And as a result, it's wisely ambiguous and just filled with passion.
Are you gonna put me smoking weed in the thing?
Maybe. I don't think just to do it.
I've given you free range. I mean, I have no stipulations. I've always needed more out of life, more out of where I was. You know, my parents ran this very controlling house, and so I ran away a lot. By like 16, I was no longer living with my parents, like, at all. I just wanted to fucking skate.
In a particularly strong year for documentaries, my favorite could have so easily never been made. It began with the same intent as literally hundreds of thousands of similar projects. A kid shooting footage of his friends skateboarding. In this case, the kid is Bing Liu from Rockford, Illinois. The critical difference is that Liu keeps the cameras rolling, even when they're not skating. Starts filming interviews with his friends, asking them questions about their childhoods, about what they want from life. And he keeps it up for years. And when Liu finds his story partway through Minding the Gap, that his friends and himself all share a history of domestic violence, there's a triumphant sense that we have just witnessed nothing less than the realization of the promise of consumer digital cameras. Despite the project growing larger and more important by the year, Liu manages to keep skateboarding at the heart of it all. A moving commitment to what started this project and, unquestionably, his new career as a filmmaker.
I'm ready for the Russian ambassador.
Who did your makeup?
We went for something dramatic. Do you like it?
You look like a badger.
Oh.
Are you going to cry?
Really?
Well, what do you think you look like?
Badger.
Do you really think you can meet the Russian delegation looking like that?
No.
I will manage it. Go back to your rooms.
Thank you. Did you just look at me? Did you? Look at me! Look at me! How dare you! Close your eyes!
Dense with comedic jabs and gallows humor, The Favorite tracks the web of intention and motivation being spun by three women vying for different varieties of power. And power is what The Favorite is all about. The shades of power we exert over one another. From the absolute political power of a queen, to the social power of securing her favor, to the interpersonal power of earning her desire. Watching this game of power twist, contort, and pretzel its way throughout the many rooms of the Queen's palace is fascinating and relentlessly hilarious. But this is much more than an 1800s farce. Take the wildly unexpected fisheye shots that cinematographer Robbie Ryan throws in. What better way to remind the viewer that we're witnessing a timeless portrayal of human behavior than to capture this incredibly ornate 19th century universe with the visual impact of a 2018 doorbell camera. It's my favorite from director Yorgos Lanthimos in a long, long time. And the thing about Lanthimos to remember is that he was launched onto the international scene with Dogtooth, his 2009 film that rode its compelling premise to cult classic status. I found that the success of Dogtooth has, in an admittedly small way, kind of foiled a bit of Lanthimos' recent efforts as he contends with those expectations. Even the best of it, which I think is 2015's The Lobster, feels walled in by its own premise, by the end at least. Here in The Favorite, we find him unburdened from that obligation for the first time, making the core asset of the film not the premise, but this tangled trio of relationships. And it's a construct that works, and works from the beginning to the end.
What?
Food's getting cold.
I like it cold. Huh?
I said one more week of 8th grade, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, huh?
Can't believe you're gonna be in high school.
And at number 3 is the most unexpected debut of the year for me, an authentic twist on coming of age from stand-up comedian Bo Burnham that perfectly captures the trauma of growing up over-endowed with the great enemy of youth, sensitivity. Elsie Fisher stars as Kayla, an 8th grader submerged right in the heart of the part of growing up where it becomes clear that it's time to become a person, a something approaching adulthood person. Tough for anyone, but Kayla is processing this time through the lens of anxiety that colors every interaction with heightened stakes, sometimes viscerally so. As for Burnham's part, he's remarkably unencumbered as a first-time director, giving the film its core sense of humor while going far beyond simply adapting his stand-up into a narrative form. Above all, I'm impressed at Burnham's commitment to keeping the conflict in 8th grade largely internal. There are a few points of external drama, of course, to drive the plot, but this character's arc is largely about self-acceptance, and that feels fresh, very honest, and just critical for actual 8th graders to see. It's a confident arrival for both Burnham and Fisher, and is one of this year's best career-making debuts.
Can that happen?
Who was in there?
Just sort of my hopes and dreams.
Right.
ね私が言った通りだったでしょ。
そんなの長続きしないよ。
そうだけどさ、でもほら血がつながってない方がいいってこともあるじゃない。
まあ余計な期待しないだけね。そうそう。お姉さん。
This is the one film of the year I would hate to talk the magic out of, so I'll just say this. Rarely before have I been this surprised at the extent to which I'd been lured under the wing of a director's influence. Hirokazu Kurita works almost exclusively in the realm of familial bonds. We've seen so many permutations of family in his work. Fathers and sons, sisters, grandparents and children. All of that work, everything he's learned and accomplished, is pushed into Shoplifters to render his most exquisitely moving portrait of a family yet. this one bound together more by circumstance and love than blood. If there's any complaint to find about Kurita's work, it's that he doesn't seem to have a second gear, so to speak, but he finds it at last here. And it turns out to be, I think, the final piece needed to secure him a genuine masterpiece. But don't take it from me, this is the Palme d'Or winner for 2018. It's the best in an unbelievably strong filmography and a true must-see.
I wasn't aware that I had offended.
Jesus doesn't want our suffering. He suffered for us. He wants our commitment and our obedience.
And what of his creation? The heavens declare the glory of God. God is present everywhere, in every plant, every river, every tiny insect. The whole world is a manifestation of his holy presence. I think this is an issue where the church can lead, but they say nothing. The U.S. Congress still denies climate change? Where were we when these people were elected?
For me, choosing my pick for the best film of a year is really more like choosing the best experience that I had that year at the movies. The world-shifting, mind-clouding experience that permeated the rest of the week like a wedding or a funeral. This year, that experience was certainly First Reformed, Paul Schrader's best film. It concerns a pastor who is thrown into a spiritual and moral crisis after meeting with a distraught environmentalist who poses the question, what would God think about how we've treated the earth? And if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and leave it at that. Don't look at the trailer, don't look into it, and that's not about twists, but rather that each new advancement in this plot felt, to me, colossal. And that's a testament to Ethan Hawke's performance, that it's dialed into perfection. In addition to that experience element, First Reformed is also the movie about our time, about 2018. It's about topics as relevant as climate change and modern challenges in religion, but above all, it's about how we build and reinforce our worldview, and how a radically new one can act as an infection, wreaking havoc on the way we experience and process reality. In these ways, it makes for an intriguing companion piece to Taxi Driver, the film Schrader is most well known for having written, both in terms of how it confronts the darkness of our time, as well as giving an unforgettable visage to the impact that darkness can have on the inhabitants of our world. It might even be more atmospheric than Taxi Driver as a result of Schrader both writing and directing this time, but in a different way. Schrader chose to present the film in a square aspect ratio, and combined with the attractively formal opening sequence, it is very easy to be lulled into the space of some kind of pensive, cerebral affair. But luckily, Schrader has much more up his sleeve with this one. And one thing I actually appreciate most about First Reformed is how that lovely, ceremonious aesthetic clashes with the complete lack of subtlety found in the film's best moments. It was certainly the experience of the year, the one I wanted to rewatch immediately, the one that best speaks to our time. First Reformed is my pick for the best film of 2018. All right, those are my picks. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found at least a couple to seek out in the new year. 2018 was a pretty good year for movies, especially for genre. I think it was one of the better years of the recent bunch for genre films. And despite there being 18 picks on this thing, a lot actually still got left out. So I'd like to very, very quickly shout out a couple more projects that, while not having a place as a whole on the list, certainly had elements worth mentioning. Starting with Searching. This is a mystery thriller that is told entirely through screens. So computers, phones, and tablets. This is a concept that's been done before in horror, but never so effectively as here, and I think this is probably a concept killer. It is so well done, especially in the opening sequence that does all the exposition and tells this emotional story of a family just through their desktop computers over the years, going all the way back to the kind of Windows 95 era and forward. Just a brilliant execution of a really fun to watch concept. Gotta mention use of sound in A Quiet Place. Very enjoyable, very different experience this year, but also in A Quiet Place, I really liked the sense of place that it had. I probably have the most sort of geographic connection to the layout of their farm in that movie because of just how well they covered all angles of it throughout. And lastly, Transit. This is a Christian Petzold film. He made Phoenix. And the deal with this one is that it's a World War II film about a couple characters trying to escape Nazi-occupied France before being discovered, except that the film doesn't do anything to establish itself as a period piece beyond that. So there is modern vehicles, and it's a modern setting and modern cities. Only the characters that are core to the story seem to be living out this this recreation of the 1940s. And as a result, it's basically daring you to find what's happening to be ludicrous, to say, we would never let this happen. The police wouldn't just turn on the citizens. But of course, we did, and they did. So that element of it is super evocative and worth a recommendation alone, even though I didn't love the overall film. All right, that's all for now. Thanks to Meg Fiechter for all of the art and visual design you've been seeing in this video. Thanks to the filmmakers for providing me with a full year's worth of thought-provoking entertainment. And thanks to you for watching. I'll see you next year.